It was just another quiet shift on the edge of known space. Out past Mars, past the asteroid belt, way beyond where most people ever thought about going, a small listening post hung in the dark. It wasn't flashy, just a cluster of solar panels, a rotating habitat ring, and a tangle of antennas pointed toward the stars. Most folks back on Earth had never heard of it. Those who had called it Aurora Station, though nobody really knew why. Maybe because it watched the dawn of signals from deep space. Inside, a lone scientist sat in a dimly lit control room, sipping lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug. The hum of life support and the soft ping of data streams filled the silence. For weeks, nothing unusual had come through, just the usual cosmic static, distant pulsars, and the occasional automated cargo ship ping. Routine, boring even, but then, something changed. A faint signal blinked onto the screen, weak, distorted, almost buried under layers of noise. At first it looked like interference, maybe a glitch in the receiver. But it repeated, not randomly, in a pattern, and not just any pattern. It carried the faint rhythm of language. The scientist leaned forward, eyes narrowing. They ran a decryption script, something old, something rarely used. Most signals from deep space were either natural or machine-generated. This one felt different. Human. After hours of cleaning up the noise, aligning fragments and cross-referencing old archives, the truth began to surface. The signal wasn't new. It was over 80 years old, and it wasn't just a message, it was a recording. What played back wasn't a greeting or a distress call in the usual sense. It was raw, unfiltered, terrifying. Grainy video flickered to life on the screen. A ship interior, familiar, almost comforting at first. The SS Persephone, a colony vessel launched in the early 2100s, carrying over 3,000 souls to a new world near Proxima Centauri. Official records said it vanished due to a navigation error, lost to the void. Tragic but not suspicious. But this footage told a different story. The camera, probably from a personal device, shook as it panned across a corridor. People were huddled together, faces pale with fear. Some were crying. Others stared blankly as if they'd already given up. Then came the sound. Heavy footsteps, metallic and rhythmic. Not human. Figures entered the frame, tall, armored, with smooth obsidian-like exoskeletons and too many joints in their limbs. The Cathar, a species Earth had met decades ago. Quiet, reserved, considered non-aggressive by the galactic conquered. The loose alliance of spacefaring civilizations that Earth had joined with cautious optimism. But what happened next shattered that illusion. The Cathar didn't speak. They didn't negotiate. They moved with cold precision, separating families, dragging people away. One clip showed a child, couldn't have been more than 6, clinging to an adult's leg, sobbing, "Don't let them take me," before being pulled off by gloved hands. The adult screamed, but the sound cut out abruptly, replaced by static. Then came the worst part. A voice, calm, clinical, explained in broken but understandable English. Subjects will undergo neural recalibration. Impure memories will be purged. Compliance ensures survival. The screen cut to a sterile chamber lined with strange machines. People were strapped in, eyes wide with terror, before a hood-like device descended over their heads. Moments later they sat up, blank, empty, obedient. This wasn't rescue. This was erasure. And the most chilling detail? The date stamp on the footage matched the Persephone's last known transmission. The ship hadn't been lost. It had been captured. And the entire incident had been covered up. The scientist sat frozen, coffee forgotten, hands trembling. This wasn't just a historical curiosity. This was proof. Proof that a supposedly peaceful alien species had committed atrocities against humans. And worse, the Galactic Conquered had known. They'd buried it. Called it a navigation anomaly, to avoid rocking the fragile peace. For a long time there was only silence in the control room. Just the hum of machines and the weight of what had just been uncovered. The scientist knew what came next. Reporting this through official channels would mean it vanished into bureaucracy, maybe even got erased. The Conquered valued stability over truth, always had. But someone had risked everything to send this signal. Maybe they'd hidden it in the ship's black box. Maybe they'd bounced it off a dead satellite, hoping someone someday would hear it. That act of defiance deserved more than a closed file and a shrug, so, Against every rule, against every protocol, the scientist made a choice. They copied the entire file, video, audio metadata, and encrypted it with a public key. Then, using a back-channel network most people didn't even know existed, a mesh of independent satellites, academic relays, and old Earth-based radio towers, they sent it out. Not to governments, not to diplomats. To everyone, the message was simple. Watch this. Remember this. Decide for yourselves. Within minutes, the file began to spread. From a university server in Jakarta to a hacker collective in Buenos Aires, from a lunar news hub to a Martian farming commune, it leapt across networks like wildfire. People woke up in the middle of the night to alerts on their devices. Others saw it shared in community feeds, tagged with just 2 words. They lied. And as the first viewers watched the grainy footage of frightened faces and cold-eyed invaders, something began to stir, not just anger, but a deep, burning sense of betrayal. Not just at the Cathar, but at the system that let it happen, at the silence that allowed it to be forgotten. Humanity had spent decades trying to prove it belonged among the stars, polite, cooperative, eager to learn. But now, faced with the truth of what had been done to its own people and swept under the rug, a different feeling rose to the surface. It wasn't fear, it was fury, quiet at first, confused but growing, spreading, like the signal itself. And somewhere, in the endless dark between stars, the broadcast kept traveling, carrying not just a memory but a warning. And a promise: we see you now. The video didn't just spread, it exploded. One moment it was a strange file bouncing between obscure data hubs. The next it was everywhere. On public transit screens in Mumbai, on classroom projectors in Nairobi, on handheld devices in floating cities above the Pacific. People stopped what they were doing. They gathered in plazas, in cafes, in underground shelters on Mars. They watched in silence as the footage played, the child's cry, the blank stares after the recalibration, the cold efficiency of the invaders. And when it ended, no one spoke right away. They just stared at each other, eyes wide, hearts pounding. It wasn't like watching a war documentary from centuries ago. This felt personal. Those people on the screen, they could have been anyone's grandparents, neighbors, friends. They wore the same kind of clothes, spoke the same language, carried the same hopes, and they'd been erased, not in battle, but in silence. While the rest of humanity went about their lives, sipping synth coffee and arguing about politics, 3,000 souls had been stolen from memory itself. At first, people didn't know what to do. Some thought it was a hoax, but the details were too specific. The ship's registry number, the exact date, the way the lighting matched old Persephone blueprints. Experts confirmed it within hours. This was real, and it had been hidden. Then came the anger. Not the loud shouting kind, at least not at first. It started as a quiet, simmering heat in people's chests, a feeling that something deeply wrong had been allowed to happen, and no one had said a word. Parents held their kids tighter. Veterans who'd served in Earth's early space defense unit sat up straighter, jaw clenched. Students organized silent vigils outside government offices. On Luna, workers shut down a mining operation for a full shift, not in protest, but in mourning. Within a day, hashtags like "Do Remember Persephone" and "Doer's Truth Over Peace" trended across every network. But this wasn't just online noise. Real people took real action. In Tokyo, a group of engineers built a massive projection on the side of a skyscraper, replaying the broadcast every hour. In Rio, musicians composed a song using the child's last words as lyrics, soft, haunting, impossible to ignore. On Titan, where communication delays made news slow, colonists gathered in domes and passed around a single data chip, watching the footage together in shared grief. Governments tried to respond, but they were already behind. Official statements called for calm and diplomatic channels. They reminded everyone that the Galactic Conquered had rules, that rushing to judgment could destabilize peace. But the public wasn't buying it. Peace built on lies wasn't peace, it was complicity. What if it had been us? Someone asked during a live town hall in New Delhi. The question echoed everywhere. What if your family had boarded that ship? What if your child had been the one dragged away? Would you want the truth buried to keep aliens comfortable? That question changed everything. People began digging. Not just journalists, but ordinary citizens. Teachers, mechanics, farmers with orbital comms licenses. They scoured old Concorde reports, cross-referenced shipping logs, tracked down retired officials. And they found more. Small things at first. A missing cargo manifest here, a redacted incident report there. Then bigger pieces. A Cathar delegation receiving cultural exchange credits right after the Persephone disappeared. A Concord ambassador quietly retiring to a luxury habitat the same week the case was closed. It all pointed to the same thing, a cover-up. Not just by the Cathar, but by the very alliance Earth had trusted to keep the galaxy fair, and that betrayal cut deeper than fear ever could. Still, no one called for war. Not yet. Instead, something quieter and far more powerful began to grow. Unity. For the first time in decades, Earth and its off-world colonies weren't divided by politics or ideology. Mars didn't blame Earth. Luna didn't hoard resources. Titan didn't stay silent. They all felt the same wound, and they all wanted the same thing, the truth fully told with no more hiding. In schools, teachers paused regular lessons to talk about ethics, about what it means to stand up when others look away. In factories, workers added small black ribbons to their uniforms, not as a symbol of death but of remembrance. On social feeds, people shared stories of their own ancestors who'd suffered in silence during Earth's darker times, colonial erasures, forced relocations, forgotten genocides. "We swore never again," one post read, "but we let it happen in space." That phrase, "never again," started appearing everywhere. Not as a slogan, but as a promise. And then came the broadcasts, not from governments, from people. A fisherman in the Atlantic sent a short message. "I never left Earth, but those were my people too. I won't forget." A botanist on a Mars greenhouse recorded herself holding a seedling. "We grow life. They took it away. We remember." A teenager in Jakarta used a homemade antenna to beam the Persephone footage directly into low orbit. Relays so even remote stations could receive it. Each message was simple, raw, human, and together, they formed something the galaxy hadn't seen before. A civilization speaking with one voice, not in rage, but in resolve. The Concorde noticed. Of course they did. Their envoys sent urgent messages demanding Earth contain the misinformation. They warned of diplomatic consequences. But Earth's leaders, sensing the tide had turned, did something unexpected. They didn't shut it down. They amplified it. Official channels began airing the footage during prime time. Public archives uploaded every recovered document. Even the military, usually tight-lipped, released declassified sensor logs that indirectly supported the timeline. It wasn't rebellion, it was alignment. The people had spoken and their leaders finally listened. And through it all, the original scientist, the one who'd sent the signal, remained silent. No interviews, no grand speeches, just a single line added to the file's metadata before it went public. They tried to make them disappear. "We won't let them." That line became a mantra, because this wasn't just about the past. It was about who humanity wanted to be moving forward. Would they stay polite guests in a galaxy that hid its crimes? Or would they become the kind of species that stood up, even when it was hard, even when it risked everything? The answer was already spreading, one viewer at a time. In homes, in ships, in domes, under alien skies, people looked at the faces in the footage and made a silent vow. "We see you. We remember you, and we won't let this happen again." The fury wasn't loud yet, but it was deep, and it was growing, like a storm gathering just beyond the horizon, quiet, inevitable, and ready to change everything. The silence from the Galactic Concord didn't last long, but when it broke, it wasn't with answers. It was with warnings. High-ranking envoys, draped in ceremonial robes and speaking in calm, measured tones, appeared on every official channel. They didn't deny the footage. They didn't explain it. Instead, they called it emotionally charged, taken out of context, and a threat to galactic stability. One Velnari arbiter, their voice smooth as polished stone, even suggested that humanity's reaction showed a lack of maturity for interstellar society. Peace requires patience, they said. Not outrage, but patience had already run out. Back on Earth and across the colonies, people didn't see themselves as immature. They saw themselves as awake. And once you're awake, it's hard to pretend you're still asleep. Governments were caught in the middle. Some leaders, nervous about trade routes and shared technology, urged restraint. Let the conquered investigate, they said. Give diplomacy a chance. But the public wasn't waiting. Crowds gathered outside embassies, not to shout but to stand. Thousands of people, silent, holding up tablets playing the Persephone footage on loop. No banners, no chants. Just presence, a quiet refusal to look away. Then came the conquered's next move. Pressure. Trade shipments slowed. Requests for joint research were denied. Earth's access to deep space navigation beacons, critical for safe travel, was quietly restricted. It wasn't a declaration of war, but it felt like punishment. Like a parent taking away a child's toys for asking too many questions. That's when something shifted. Instead of backing down, Earth's leadership did the unexpected. In a live broadcast watched by billions, the head of the United Terran Council stood not in a polished suit, but in simple civilian clothes. No podium, no dramatic lighting, just a person speaking plainly to their people and to the galaxy. We were told to stay quiet for the sake of peace, they said. But peace built on lies isn't peace. It's surrender. And we will not surrender the truth. The word spread faster than any policy ever could. And then, something even more surprising happened. Whispers began coming in, from the edges of the galaxy, not from major powers but from the small, often ignored worlds. A mining colony on a frozen moon sent a coded message. We saw what they did to you. They did the same to us. A nomadic fleet of traders shared old logs showing Cathar ships near vanished outposts, an ocean-dwelling species, long dismissed as non-communicative, transmitted a series of sonar pulses that, when translated, read, "Your pain is not alone." These weren't allies in the traditional sense. They were survivors. And for the first time, they saw humanity not as naive newcomers, but as the first to speak what everyone had been too afraid to say. That changed everything. Humanity had always been seen as emotional, impulsive, too attached to the past. But now that weakness looked like strength. While older civilizations had learned to swallow injustice to keep the peace, humans had refused. And in doing so, they gave others permission to remember their own silenced tragedies. On a dusty outpost near the Orion Arm, a group of engineers, human and non-human, began sharing data openly, bypassing conquered filters. On a desert world where water was more precious than data, a local elder used a solar-powered transmitter to rebroadcast the Persephone file in their native tongue. Even species with no direct link to the incident sent symbolic gestures. A single flower from a methane garden, a carved stone from a dead moon, a melody played on an instrument no human had ever heard. It wasn't an alliance. Not yet, but it was the beginning of something real. Meanwhile, the conquered doubled down. They labeled the growing movement disruptive. They accused Earth of inciting panic. And in a closed session, they voted to suspend Earth's voting rights until order was restored. But Earth didn't need their approval anymore. Communities began organizing on their own. Farmers on Mars rerouted surplus oxygen to independent research labs. Dock workers on Ceres refused to load Concorde cargo unless it was inspected for hidden records. Students built open-source decryption tools so anyone could verify old files. It wasn't chaos, it was coordination. Not from the top down, but from the ground up. And through it all, the message stayed the same. We won't forget. And we won't let you forget either. The Cathar, for their part, stayed silent. No denials, no explanations. Just cold, unreadable stillness. That silence spoke louder than any defense ever could. Back on Aurora Station, the scientist who'd first uncovered the signal watched it all unfold from the edge of the void. They hadn't expected this. They'd only wanted the truth to be seen. But what was happening now was bigger than one broadcast. It was a reckoning. And humanity, for all its flaws, was leading it. Not with weapons, but with memory. People started calling it the Awakening. Not because they'd discovered something new, but because they'd finally stopped pretending they hadn't known. In homes, parents showed their children the footage, not to scare them, but to teach them. This is why we speak up, they'd say. This is why silence is dangerous. Schools added new lessons on ethical responsibility in interstellar society. Artists painted murals of the Persephone passengers not as victims, but as witnesses. The fury hadn't turned violent. Instead, it had turned purposeful, and the galaxy began to notice. Species that had once rolled their eyes at human drama now listened. Because for the first time someone was asking the hard questions. Who decides what's forgotten? Who gets to erase a people? And who watches the watchers? Earth didn't have all the answers, but it had asked the right question and refused to let it be buried. So while the conquered clung to its old rules, humanity built something new, a network of truth woven from ordinary voices, shared pain, and the stubborn belief that no one should disappear without a trace. It wasn't perfect. It was messy, emotional, and full of uncertainty, but it was honest. And in a galaxy that had grown too comfortable with secrets, honesty felt like revolution. The old order was cracking. Not with explosions, but with whispers. Not with armies, but with people choosing, every day, to remember. And somewhere in the dark between stars, the Persephone's final message wasn't just being heard, it was being answered. Humanity didn't build a war fleet. They built a truth network. After weeks of tension, sanctions, and silence from the old powers, Earth made a choice that stunned the galaxy. Instead of fighting with weapons, they'd fight with light. Not laser beams, but the kind of light that reveals what's been hidden in the dark. They called it Project Veritas. Not a secret military operation, but an open broadcast. Every archive, every recovered log, every piece of evidence about the Persephone, and dozens of other vanished ships, silenced colonies and buried atrocities was compiled, verified, and prepared for transmission. Not just to Earth, not just to human colonies, but to every inhabited world in known space. The plan was simple. Tell the whole story in every language, through every channel possible. No filters, no edits. No Concord approval needed. Engineers worked around the clock, linking old university satellites, repurposing cargo drones, even using deep space telescopes as relay points. On Mars, students jury-rigged solar-powered transmitters on rover frames. In orbital shipyards, retired freighters were fitted with broadcast arrays and painted with one phrase in a dozen languages. Remember. And then, on a quiet Tuesday morning by Earth time, they pressed send. The signal didn't roar. It rippled. Like a stone dropped in a still pond, it spread outward in waves of data, carried by quantum-linked beacons and old-school radio pulses alike. Within hours, it reached Luna. Within a day, Mars and the Belt. Within a week, it touched the outer colonies, then jumped to neutral trade hubs, then to worlds the conquered had long ignored. People everywhere stopped what they were doing. Farmers on methane-rich plains, deep-sea dwellers in pressurized domes, nomadic traders in asteroid skiffs, they all received the same message. Not as a threat, not as propaganda, just as truth. And the truth was heavy. Footage showed not just the Persephone, but other ships, some human, some not, being boarded, emptied, erased. Records revealed conquered officials accepting cultural gifts from the Cathar right after incidents were closed. Audio logs captured whispered orders. Classify as accident. Do not investigate further. It wasn't just about one species or one crime. It was about a system that protected the powerful by silencing the powerless. And for the first time, everyone could see it. Back on Earth, there were no victory celebrations. No triumphant speeches. Just quiet resolve. People gathered in parks, in community centers, in virtual spaces, watching the data unfold together. Some cried. Some sat in stunned silence. Others immediately began translating, sharing, explaining to neighbors who didn't understand the technical terms. This wasn't entertainment. It was accountability. And then the Cathar reacted. Not with words. With action. A small fleet, 3 sleek obsidian warships detached from their home system and made a direct course for Aurora Station. The message was clear: silence the source. Destroy the station, erase the scientist, end the broadcast at its root. Panic rippled through Earth's defense networks. Military command scrambled ships, but they were hours away. Aurora Station had no weapons, no shields, just a skeleton crew and a mountain of truth. But something unexpected happened. Before the Cathar fleet even reached the outer marker buoys, ships began appearing in the void around Aurora. Not warships, not even military vessels, just ordinary ships, cargo haulers carrying grain from Titan, medical frigates returning from asteroid clinics, university research vessels, even private yachts owned by retired teachers and artists. They came from everywhere. Human and non-human. Some flew under no flag at all. One by one, they moved into position, not to attack, but to stand. They formed a loose, silent ring around the station, engines idling, lights blinking in unison. No weapons charged. No threats issued. Just presence. When the Cathar fleet arrived, they found not a target, but a wall of witnesses. The lead Cathar ship hovered unmoving for nearly an hour. Sensors scanned the civilian armada. They could have fired. They could have blasted through, but to do so would mean slaughtering unarmed ships on live broadcast, watched by millions across the galaxy. And this time there would be no cover-up. No navigation error. Everyone would see, so they didn't fire. Instead, they turned, slowly, deliberately, and retreated into the dark. The moment they did, the civilian ships didn't cheer. They didn't celebrate. They just stayed, guarding the truth, not with force, but with courage. Back on Earth, people watched the feed with tears in their eyes, not because they'd won a battle, but because they'd proven something deeper, that humanity, and those who stood with them, valued truth more than fear. In the days that followed, the ripple became a wave. On a world of crystalline forests, elders held a council and publicly severed ties with the conquered. On a desert moon, miners refused to process Cathar ore. In neutral spaceports, traders began labeling goods. Verified, no Cathar involvement. Even species that had never spoken to humans sent messages of solidarity, not through diplomats, but through art, music, and shared silence. The old Concord's authority didn't collapse overnight. But its illusion of fairness did. And once that was gone, trust crumbled fast. Humanity didn't take over. They didn't demand power. They simply refused to participate in a system that traded truth for comfort. And in doing so, they gave others permission to do the same. Project Veritas kept broadcasting, not as a weapon, but as a mirror. Every day more evidence surfaced, not just from Earth, but from dozens of worlds finally finding their voice. The galaxy was waking up, one truth at a time, and at the center of it all was something simple, human, and unstoppable: the refusal to look away. No bombs were dropped. No cities burned. But a revolution had begun, not with fire, but with memory. Because in the end, the darkest lies can't survive in the light, and humanity, for all its mistakes, had learned how to shine. The old Galactic Concord didn't fall with a bang. It faded like a bad dream at sunrise, quietly, inevitably, and with a sense of relief that it was finally over. In its place rose something new, not built by treaties signed in marble halls, but stitched together by shared pain, verified truth, and the quiet courage of ordinary people. They called it the Alliance of Witnessed Truths. No grand title. No fancy acronym. Just a promise. What happens will be seen. What is hidden will be found. And no one disappears without a witness. Earth didn't lead it, not in the way empires lead. There was no throne, no capital, no human flag flying over alien skies. Instead, humanity became something else, a reminder. A living example that even the smallest voice, when rooted in truth, can shake the stars. The scientist from Aurora Station, still unnamed in public records, finally spoke, not from a podium, but from a simple broadcast booth on a quiet orbital habitat. Their voice was tired but steady. "We didn't do this to be heroes," they said. "We did it because forgetting is a kind of death. And those people on the Persephone, they deserve to be remembered." The word spread, not as a slogan, but as a standard. Memorials appeared, not just on Earth, but on dozens of worlds. Some were grand. A ring of light orbiting Proxima Centauri, shaped like the Persephone's hull. Others were small. A single tree planted in a Martian greenhouse, its leaves etched with passenger names. On a water world where writing didn't exist, elders taught a new song, one that carried the story of the lost ship in its rhythm. Memory took many forms, but it was everywhere, and with memory came change. The new alliance didn't just punish the guilty, it rebuilt the system. Every member world, no matter how small, got a voice in the council. Every incident, no matter how minor, was logged in a public archive that couldn't be edited or deleted. Independent observers, human and non-human, were stationed at all major ports, not to enforce rules but to bear witness. If something happened, someone would see it. Someone would record it. Someone would speak. It wasn't perfect. Mistakes still happened. Old habits died hard. But now when someone tried to cover up the truth, others noticed. And they spoke up, fast, loud, and together. Humanity, once seen as too emotional, too messy, too attached to the past, was now respected for exactly those things. Because in a galaxy that had grown numb to suffering, humans still felt it, and more importantly, they still acted on it. Schools across the colonies added a new subject, not just history, but remembrance ethics. Children learned not only what happened, but why it mattered that it never be hidden again. They studied the Persephone not as a tragedy, but as a turning point, the moment humanity chose conscience over convenience. Art flourished in ways no one expected. Sculptures made from salvaged ship parts, holographic plays reenacting the broadcast discovery, music blending Earth instruments with alien harmonies, all carrying the same message: we see you. Even daily life changed. People became more careful with words like disappeared or lost. They asked harder questions. Who decided this? Who benefits from silence? Whose story isn't being told? These weren't just activist slogans. They became part of everyday conversation, like asking about the weather. And the Cathar? They didn't vanish. They couldn't. But they were isolated, not by force, but by choice. No one traded with them. No one shared data. Their ships were met with silence wherever they went. Not out of hatred, but out of principle. You don't erase people and expect to be welcomed back like nothing happened. Over time, whispers came that younger Cathar were questioning their elders. That some had even reached out quietly to learn the truth about what their leaders had done. Healing would take generations if it ever came. But at least now the truth was out, and that was the first step. Back on Earth, life went on. Markets bustled. Trains ran on time. Kids played in parks under open skies. But something had shifted beneath the surface. People walked a little taller. They listened a little more. They knew their voice mattered, not because they were powerful, but because they were part of something bigger, a community that refused to look away. The broadcast that started it all, the grainy, heartbreaking footage from the Persephone, was never taken down. It played every year on the anniversary of its discovery, not to stir anger, but to renew the promise, and we remember. We protect, we speak. And in classrooms, in homes, in ships drifting between stars, parents would show their children the faces in that old video and say, these people mattered. And because we remembered them, we made the galaxy better. That was the real victory, not in defeating an enemy, but in becoming the kind of species that wouldn't let injustice hide in the dark. The alliance of witnessed truths didn't promise peace forever, but it promised something more honest, that when darkness came, there would be light. Not from weapons, but from people choosing, every day, to see, to speak, and to stand together, and in the end, that was enough. Because humanity hadn't just awakened its darkest fury, it had awakened its deepest strength, the courage to care, even when it hurt, and the will to never forget,